Well, it's coming to the end of a rather wet winter here in Tasmania, but the last few days have been sunny and today is another beautiful sunny day. It's not going to last, of course. In another few days we'll get some more rain, but while it is sunny, I'm going to start the first plantings of the season. I've got a few things to plant over the next couple of days, so I'll bring you with me and show you what I'm planting when it's really still winter and we still can get frosts, but spring is showing its first signs of appearing. So the first thing that I'm planting today is I'm going to put some early potatoes in here. This ground has been under the plastic for most of the winter, and I rolled that back yesterday and gave it a day of sunshine. So I'm going to come through here with the rotary hoe, break it up a little bit so that I can get about 3 rows of potatoes in. The potato seed which I'm planting today is some I've kept from my own crop. This would have come from probably this same crop last year that was planted in early spring and has been kept over the year. A variety of length of shoot on it. You know, you can see some is quite big. There's really nice ones like that are really ready to plant. There's some that are not so advanced, so these will take a little bit longer to come through the ground, but everything I put in will have a shoot of some sort on it and be ready to get started fairly quickly. The remainder of this patch will be planted with potatoes around the end of October, about 2 months' time. If you're wanting any more detail on growing potatoes in Tasmania and how I do it, I have a playlist which I'll put a link to at the end of this video. Once the potatoes are in the ground, I'll bring the plastic back over them for another week or so to keep them nice and warm and get them coming out of the ground. I will of course have to keep some plastic handy once they come out of the ground for a few weeks because there is the possibility of frosts occurring which would burn them at that early stage. But by the end of September we should be free of frosts in this area. Now, I thought you might be interested to check in and see how these high-rise potatoes are growing. And as you can see, most of them have come through really nicely. The one thing that I'm noticing is that the lower ones tend to be coming up at an angle, and I'm wondering which layer they're actually coming from. I think they're coming from fairly deep, and they come up looking for light and slowly bend out because there's a lot more up here at the top than I would expect. That means some of these layers here I think are actually finding their way out the top, but there's others coming out the side, and I did notice that these top ones came through first, as you can tell by how advanced they are. The lower ones have taken more time because they have more layers to penetrate, to come out. It just really goes to show how much the natural inclination of the plant is to go vertically up rather than to come out the side. But so far looking really nice. One of the tricky things with these I'm finding at this stage is really knowing how much moisture is in there and whether they need to be watered or not. It's, you know, the straw on the outside is dry, so you don't have that much information. You really have to dig your hand down in there and feel what it's like. And right now it's quite damp, and it's probably a week since I watered them. So I think they're retaining moisture pretty well. So far all is going really nice, and we'll come back when it's harvest time and find out what's there. The second thing I'm wanting to plant today is some broad beans. Now, broad beans are one of those foods which you either love or hate. Now, I really enjoy them, but not all of my family do. I have ways in which I can persuade them to eat them though, and that's to make hummus from the broad beans. However, I plant my broad beans quite a bit later than most people do. A lot of people plant broad beans at the beginning of winter. I plant them here at the end of winter. Now I should say that both the broad beans and the potatoes are something that I would often have planted a couple of weeks earlier than this, and I would have this year if the weather had been suitable, but this year it's been too wet to get outside and do it. So it's happening now. This area has only recently had potatoes dug out of it. It hasn't been covered with plastic for quite a long time, so it's actually quite damp. Even though it's been dug up, it's had a lot of rain in it and it's way too wet for me to rotary hoe. So I'm simply going to try and use the fork hoe and the rake to get this a little bit level and cleaned up, put in some furrows and get some broad beans into it. Now, you don't need a lot of fertilizer with broad beans, but I use a little bit of blood and bone in there just to get them started. Once they get going, they are quite able to generally fix their own nitrogen. I'm going to run some furrows in using the wheel hoe. Given that it hasn't been rotary hoed, this is a lot more difficult than it would be if the ground was cultivated, but it's fine for the broad beans. Then I add a small amount of blood and bone, and then it's time to plant. Now I'm going to be fairly generous with this seed because I think some of this seed may be a bit old and it may not be as viable as I would normally have. So a bit more and I can always pull them out. So the third thing I'm going to plant today are these onions, which I grew from seed a couple of months ago. I made a video about planting these seeds. Now when I planted the seeds, I made a big mistake. I planted two different types of onion seed here, but I got them mixed up before I actually labelled them. So I don't know which is which. And I'd really love to, because there's quite a noticeable difference between germination rate and growth in the two onions. This one you can see far more germination than this one, and it's looking a lot healthier. So this is the onion I'd probably want to grow in the future, but I don't know which one it is now, so we'll have to experiment again next year. But in regard to the soil, you can see it's really lumpy because I only dug potatoes out of this last week. Some of it's had rain on it since then, and yeah, it's too wet to actually come through with a rotary hoe. Now I'm going to put down compost to plant these onions in, so all I really have to do is level this out and make sure there's not excessive weed, and then I can put a layer of compost over and plant. I lost audio in this section of video, so I'll narrate it for you. These egg carton planters are really easy. They break up nicely and go into the ground. You don't have to take anything off because the cardboard will decay. And as you can see here, the roots are actually coming through at this stage, so they're perfectly ready to plant. And because the roots haven't been disturbed, they will settle in really easily. So while those three planting jobs may have only taken a few minutes in video, in reality they've taken the better part of the day. So there's only time left for one more small planting job, and that's to plant some spinach plants in the raised beds. Now as you can see, these are plants that I have purchased and didn't raise from seed myself. I sometimes do that. When I can avoid it, I do, and I grow my own. But sometimes you find yourself running out of time and you really want to get that food produced, so you go and grab something commercial. Now I put some compost in this bed yesterday, so it's ready for me to put these in. I just put them in clumps. You could break them up individually, but they'll still produce quite well in clumps. Now I may also plant some seed, spinach seed that is, as well in here to come along when these finish. A bit lumpy some of this. And of course when I've completed this planting, I will water them in really well, because tomorrow is a fine day too, or predicted to be, even though it may be a little cloudier, which is something that will be good. I always try and plant little seedlings like this at the end of the day when they're not going to get the heat of the sun, and will settle in better overnight. Well, that's the end of the planting for today, but I still have other things I need to put in. I need most of all to put some tomato seed in to get that started, but that'll have to happen another day. So I'm back now for the second day of August planting, and it's another beautiful sunny day. It's really nice to get days like this at the end of winter, and really shows us how close spring is. So what I'm doing today is I'm going to plant some tomato seed. So I've got a selection of tomato seed here. Oh, that's spinach, not tomato. There's one here, mortgage lifter, that Samuel chose. He particularly wanted to grow those. He's unfortunately not here to plant it today, but he can put the plants out later. I've got some Tommy Toe. Now that's going to go in the greenhouse, and I'm going to direct sow that. I have some seed that I've kept from the indeterminate roamers, and I want to plant those into this egg carton that I've got. This is an 18 one, and so that one will go in there. I also have a large variety here that I call Roy's Giant. It came from a friend of mine, and I'll plant some of that. I might put some of the mortgage lifter into this other egg carton, so I'll just prepare that one. So, snipping these off. And I cut these out, just makes them easier to break up. Let's just snip it off. And that fits in there nicely. Now I have here some seed raising mix that I prepared earlier. It's basically a screened potting mix with some added grit and a tiny bit of blood and bone added to it. So that can go in. Now I frequently don't get around to planting tomato seeds and raising my own plants, and so find myself buying tomato plants, and sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're not with that. The example is I have in recent years bought Rouge de Marmande and have not been happy with the quality of the plant and the way it's grown. While that's been a traditional tomato for me to grow, I'm not actually going to grow it this year. I'm going to try something different. I have forgotten to put holes in the bottom of these, so I'm just pushing some through with the scissors. Not the ideal way. It's much better if you do it first, but sometimes we forget things. So I'm going to do this big 18 one with the indeterminate roamers. Now I only want about a dozen plants, but you get failures, so it's worthwhile planting more than you actually need. I will use a pencil just to make some little indentations. And I'm going to try and get about couple of seeds in each one. Give myself a couple of chances. Now these indeterminate roamers I found were really a nice tomato last year. They cropped really well and they were quite a sweet, tasty tomato, better than the roamers that I had previously grown, which were a bush type. So I'll be a little bit more prepared for them this year for their indeterminate habit of growing high, and try and create a little bit higher trellis situation for them. But whatever the case, I think they'll be a good tomato. Come bring them up again. Because I made it really moist, I don't need to really water those seeds very much for quite a while now. So into this I'll do half a dozen of Roy's Giant. Get some seed out there. Yes, it's not going to take too many. Now, I will try and avoid the mistake I made with the onions, and that is to label them before I go any further. So I've got some little tags here, and I can simply label them up so that I won't forget which is which. And that might even poke into there if I stick a hole in it. Or I can just set it down into there and that'll be fine. So in the other end I will put some mortgage lifter. Now I've never grown mortgage lifter before, so that'll be interesting. I think Samuel was attracted to the beautiful picture of tomatoes. It is a traditional Australian variety that is somewhat forgotten about these days, as modern varieties have taken over. But I don't know about you, I find the modern varieties are not very tasty, and these old ones are much better. Well, if all these grow, these will be actually probably too many plants, and lots of tomatoes, more than we need. We'll have to find creative ways of using them. To germinate it, what I will do is, because that will drip water through, is I'm going to put it into this tray, which I think was a kitty litter tray or something like that, and I can then actually take it and put it in the sunroom where it's nice and warm under glass, and we'll keep those seeds warm and hopefully bring them up quite quickly. I've got 3 different varieties here. We've got, I'll do 1 plant of the mortgage lifter, 1 of Roy's Giant, and 2 of Tommy Toe. So traditionally I've grown a lot of Gardener's Delight indoors, and it's a great tomato, but occasionally you like to have a change, so I thought this year we'll try something different. So I'm going to put a few seeds in, but I will take it down to just 1 plant when they come up. Which I know people go, oh, I don't like to plant seeds, and what do I do with these other plants? Well, if you want, you can dig them out and pop them and give them away to your friends. But ultimately, the insurance is worthwhile, that you're actually going to get at least 1 plant out of it. Whereas if you put in 1 seed and get nothing, you've wasted a lot of time. So I always go for more seeds, and yes, that wastes a few plants, but I'd rather do that than waste the weeks waiting for the next lot to come. Now, so this is Roy's Giant, and again, a few seeds in. These are a really big tomato. It's a late tomato, it's not going to come early. I'd say that it needs a long season. I'd say this Tommy Toe is going to be the first that will come into production. So do that one up this way. Once I've grown these, I'll probably keep my own seed for next year. Direct sowing like this, I find, is probably the best way to go with any seed, but it depends on the conditions. So because it's still too cool outdoors to plant tomatoes, I do raise the seedlings, and that way gain a couple of weeks. You don't really gain as much as you think you do, but you do gain a little bit and advance them along fairly quickly. But in here, it's quite warm enough now on these sunny days especially to direct sow, and they will come up and get going at their own when they're ready basically now. So I'll put the sprinkler on and let this water, and then all I have to do is wait to enjoy some tomatoes in summertime.